Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a number of articles that have been doing the rounds for some years now about how white male, this is apparently uniquely a white Western first world country problem, that white men's sperm counts have fallen by as much as half over the last 40 odd years. Now, I don't know for how long these records have been kept on this. I'm assuming that the technology to definitively isolate sperm counts probably hasn't been around forever. But let's assume for the moment that these studies and analysis are true. I'm a little suspicious, but anyway. So sperm counts that were 100 in 1979 or something are now 50 today is the argument. And this is supposed to have, or would obviously have, considerable effects on procreation. Now, we'll have a look at this, see whether this sort of argument stands up. But how do you then get around this? Do you procreate, for example, or attempts to procreate? Should they be more frequent? Should they be more vigorous? What could be done? Because if you're so mathematically, if your sperm count drops by half, and therefore the likelihood of successful conception falls by half, then could you counteract that simply by more acts of procreation, which would then bring it back to the median sort of thing? I don't know. I'm sort of just putting that out there, but. Or is it a net decline? Now, there are a few things that don't work. Why is it uniquely white people, white men rather, that are affected? Why is it that black men are not affected to the same extent? Why is it that brown Islamic people are not affected to the same extent? Why is it that Indian people are not, from the subcontinent, are not affected to the same extent, and so on? So why is it uniquely white? But then another argument comes up, well, it's because of white Western lifestyle. White people have moved to white-collar jobs, working in offices, air conditioning. They don't have natural light, or not exposed to natural light. They're hunched over computer screens all day, and they're not getting enough exercise. They're living on a fast food diet, and so on and so forth. But then, okay, that's one thing. But then the effect is still uneven. There are plenty of subcontinent people that, for example, work that way, Indian programmers and so on. Why isn't it affecting them to the same extent, or even to some sort of approximately similar level? Then there are other arguments that we've got so many chemicals in the environment. There's so many chemicals in packaging and in food and these sorts of things. Okay, well, let's look at that then. But people living in the same area, in the same countries, migrants or whatever, people living in the same area, why are they not similarly affected? Why is it only white people are affected? But it doesn't seem to have any effect on black people, or again, other races. The chemicals only affect white people. So we could be looking at a unique series or sequence of chemicals that only attack the white sort of sperm, or no one else is. I mean, that seems rather unlikely. I guess it's not impossible, but it seems rather unlikely. There are other sort of lifestyle sort of things that white people just don't do enough exercise, and as other races are involved in, say, more manual labor jobs, that they have more fitness or greater muscle mass, or these things like that, and that has an effect on. No, I don't buy that. I mean, for someone who's been to the United States over many years and many times, to find not that they don't exist, but to find or to see or observe a fit looking sort of black guy, there's not many of them out there, or women for that matter. There are some. And maybe school kid teenagers are slimmer or something, but generally there's obesity to the point of absolute corpulence is the general rule, certainly by my observation, or certainly in the cities anyway. So that doesn't stack up either. And now, when you look at sort of the many of the black women in the United States, they're living in government housing, they're obese, they've got a very poor quality diet and that sort of thing. And yet, but by the time they're 26, they've got 5 children by different partners. So there's obviously high levels of fertility there. If you go to somewhere like, say, Afghanistan, where their diet is rather poor and people by Western standards look almost emaciated, yet they're able to have an average of what 5.85 children per woman. So diet and poor sanitary conditions and those sort of things don't seem to be slowing that down. Similarly, in those cultures, Pakistan too, it's quite common for cousins to procreate. It's not considered unusual in their culture. So there's a lot of quite hideous deformities, as you can imagine, from that amount of inbreeding. And yet, in spite of that sort of thing being very low success rate, typically in terms of a successful conception or even bringing to full-term birth, they're still able to give birth to the most hideously deformed infants and in large numbers, as I've seen personally in these countries. So really, we're looking for something else. The answer lies elsewhere. No, I don't know where it is, by the way. But none of the arguments or theories or whatever I've seen put forward, none of them really stack up. They seem to fall apart because, again, you come back to think, why does it uniquely affect white men and no others to the same degree? And why has the decline been so sharp? I mean, a reduction by half in as many years or even fewer years of sperm count seems to be quite astonishing. Now, we may be looking at doctored numbers or the same people that give us immigration statistics are the same ones doing the sperm count. So you'd have to be dubious over the reliability. Now, the argument also is that, well, given the sperm counts are dropping, white people are procreating less. This is the reason why we have to bring in millions of illiterate, gazillions of illiterate brown and black peasants from the third world. This is why. Now, the sort of the counter, or the another sort of subset argument is, well, look, we can't get other white people to come to the white countries because every white country has got a sperm count. So we've got an allegation here that at the same time, all across the wealthy white Western world, the sperm count of all white men in all the first world countries all declined by 50%, all at the same time. Now, you'd have to be quite suspicious about that. Either it was orchestrated or we're being fed bullshit numbers, maybe a bit of both. But I think there are other sort of factors here. But the one fact remains is that white women are producing, procreating at a rate of 1.3 or 1.1 actually, the children per woman, whereas black people are 3.5. Islamic people, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, are 4, 5, 6, and that per woman. These sorts of things. So this has obviously has a big effect on outcomes in terms of procreation. Now, is it down to a reduced sperm count? Is it down to other factors? I'm not sure about this. I can't sort of find an obvious cause. I would suggest there's a combination of causes all feeding in, but I think among them is that by changing the societal structure or the social structure of the West, so that the marriage contract has no value, that the equal outcome type thing of marriage, that even though he makes all the money and takes all the risks and does all the heavy lifting, that she gets, in the event of divorce, she gets 50 to 60, 70, 80% of everything, even though she brought nothing to the marriage. These sorts of things. Marriage and procreation is a very high risk venture in the Western world, whereas it's not in in other cultures. Now, in some cultures, for example, the black culture, where it's standard in Africa as it is still in the US amongst blacks, that women have multiple partners, and that's just the standard way of doing things in that culture. So that hasn't changed. So that's the cause, I think, of the higher procreation rate there. But I think in general terms, the women entering the workforce, white women in particular have entered the workforce in much higher numbers than other groups, and that's restricted the amount of children. And also, there's just simply the sheer cost. White people still want to sort of get ahead and have a good quality life, and they're quite prepared to make sacrifices to get that. Now, the idea of making a sacrifice can be where you might say study hard at school. So while your buddies are going out, looking at playing sports or going to going out to the bars or the nightclubs, you're there hitting the books so you can get a good grade in your exams. So you're sacrificing, you're delaying your own gratification there in order to get a good education. The same could be, say, for where you want to acquire property or things like that. You may live frugally and like a real Spartan for years, so you can save up enough money to put a nice big deposit on that house, or to buy that car, or to pay off your college loans, or to maybe while you're at college you work a job, you bust your ass, you study hard, and you've also got a job so that when you come out of college you've actually got quite a small debt. All these sort of things. Now, when you look at consumer goods and the cost of living and the cost of childcare and just the loss of income if you're going to have a child, these sorts of things. And you say, well, if I want to have this particular standard of living, then I can't have children, or I can have one instead of two, or two instead of three, these sorts of things. So now that's not a configuration of understanding that the other races use. That's not a consideration for black people who wouldn't get the house anyway. So who cares? They're living on welfare. Similarly for the Islami, the Afghanis and the Pakistanis, and to a lesser extent the Indians, but also where you get where you don't get it in white families, but particularly where grandparents would look after the children if you went to work, or if you were sick and needed help, or these sorts of things. There was wider families, or your uncles or aunts would help. This is something that doesn't happen in the white community anywhere near the same extent it did. So the wider family support that these other races still give, or where they live on welfare, is something that the white folks don't have. So I think this occurs a number of levels, but if you just do the hard sort of mathematics, saying I've got to have a lower standard of living, I've got to have a more stressful life, I've got to go without, I've got to do all these sorts of things if I have children, and I think all those things combine into causing a substantial reduction in the number of children. It's just too expensive; it's not worth it. You look at rent and mortgage payments alone; these sorts of things. They're, in purchasing power terms, they're 3 times more expensive than they were 50 years ago. So food is more expensive in purchasing power terms. Energy is more expensive in purchasing power terms. So all of these things are combined. There's just less money to go around. I'll also make one final point about the decline in not simply religion, but in spirituality. You could say religious observance, but in spirituality. I remember talking to when I was a kid, sort of still in like senior high school. So I remember talking to Catholic families where they considered it something close to a religious mission, or almost a sense of religious duty to procreate. That was something they thought it was just what they had to do. It was just sort of how it was. Now that attitude you don't see even amongst Catholics. You would consider to be not necessarily devout or pious, but certainly, observing some of the Catholic religious rituals, but they don't see it that way anymore. So I think that's also a big issue that's played out. Whereas, in the Islamic faith, where they do still, whether they're devout or not, actually, but in the Islamic faith, where they see that it is their duty to procreate, to bring into the world another believer, that type of thing, then they do still apply that. And I think an element or a factor of their procreation is still related to their religious or spiritual sort of considerations. So I think, in combination with all those things, I think, what white people are in a position where, in a consumer society, and with the drastic change in cost of living equation over the last 50 years, I think that's come about through natural sort of forces. Now, if as a knock-on effect of that, men are no longer thinking in terms of procreation and sexual intimacy, things like that, or marriage and long-term commitment, as in building a family for the future and future generations and those sorts of things. And I think it's hardly surprising, given the divorce industry in the West today. then I think we've brought this, in terms of the Western world, on ourselves. And given it appears to be uniquely affecting white people, I think those are some of the reasons why. I look forward to seeing your comments below. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.